travel back to me to one of the most familiar scenes found in the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu comes down Har Sinai. Hashem has informed him that this nation has sinned, that they've created an Egel Hazav. Moshe Rabbeinu comes down the mountain, sees what's happening, sees the dancing around the Egel Hazav, and what does he do? He smashes the tablets. He throws the luchot from his hands. Did you ever stop to think about why? Why would Moshe break the luchot at this particular moment? I can understand destroying the golden calf. I can understand punishing the people who've perpetrated this event. But why break the tablets? Now, before we'll talk about it. Before we get there, let's first understand some significant points about the Aseret HaDibrot. First of all, the Ten Commandments is a poor translation. If it was going to be the Ten Commandments, it would have been Aseret HaMitzvot. It's Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 declarations, the 10 utterances from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to according to some, the first two directly to Klal Yisrael. Other than that, others that are given to Moshe, who then gives them to Klal Yisrael. So they are 10 declarations. Why are these declarations chosen? There are 613 mitzvot. 10 of them are on the luchot. Why those 10? And before we answer that question, let's understand the danger of choosing 10. What would you suggest? What would you think might be the danger?
The others don't matter?
That's correct. In other words, I could conceivably say, these are the 10 most important mitzvot. Maybe these are the only mitzvot that HaKadosh Baruch Hu transmitted to Klal Yisrael. Unless you think that I'm raising a flag of danger when it didn't exist or doesn't exist, take a look at the first Hebrew passage on your first page. It says, the first line says, Korin Aseret HaDibrot. They read the 10 declarations, Hayarim Shmo Shma, etc. That was what was done by Mikdash. Look at the next line. Omar Rav Yehuda Omar Shmuel, Af Bigvulin Bikshu Likroske. The rabbis who lived in the diaspora, well, not necessarily the diaspora, but outside, Gvulin means outside of Yerushalayim, they also wanted to read the Aseret HaDibrot. Elo shekvar bitlum mipnei ta'aromas haminim. But they did not, and they could not, because the rabbinic authorities had already forbade that, because of the potential attacks that could be brought by the minim, those who oppose Judaism. In other words, we're not going to give fuel to the fire. And therefore, even though originally the Aseret HaDibrot were part of your Shacharit service, they were taken out. And if you think it wasn't a struggle, keep going in this second to the last line. Rabbi bar Chana savar lemikneu besura. Rabbi bar Chana wanted to establish the reading of Aseret HaDibrot in Surah. Amar le Rav Chisda kvar bitlum mipnei ta'aromas haminim. Too bad, can't do it. Then again, Amemar savar lemikvehu b'Naharda. These are huge areas, huge cities of Jewish learning centers. We should read Aseret HaDibrot. No good, can't do it.
What was the objection?
The objection was that what was said here before a moment ago, that by putting those 10 into the davening and having everybody say the 10 every day, it would give fuel to those who would want to undermine Jewish tradition.
And everything else in the tefillah?
Everything else is these 10 declarations, because they were given at Har Sinai the way they were given, it gives people an opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute. The only things that were directly given by God were those 613. Maybe Moshe came up with the rest. I'm sorry, those 10. Those 10. I was just testing you. All right, so those 10, right? In other words, because they were given with such drama, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was speaking, so they, in this case, what they say is they didn't want to give fuel to our enemies. The truth is not only that, they wanted to ensure that we don't come to the conclusion that these 10 are the only ones. They are equal in importance to all the other mitzvot. They are 10 mitzvot. Yes.
So I was always taught that Hashem said the Aseret HaDibros.
Okay.
Probably.
Right.
And then he taught Moshe the rest.
Okay. So there are
These 10 were the only ones that were said.
Well, okay.
out to everybody.
Okay. Number one, there's a debate on that. And there are those who say only the first 2 were given directly by Hashem to Klal Yisrael, and the rest were given to Moshe. Correct. But somehow these 10 were projected either by Kadosh Baruch Hu or by Moshe in the middle of this thunder and lightning and everything else. And yes, the rest was written by Moshe. We end up with 613. But knowing our own people, we could undermine ourselves, right? We could look at it and say, these are the most important. They are not. They are significant in some ways, and we'll see why in just a moment, but they are not necessarily more important than any other mitzvot. Yes? Okay. So there are those who suggest, and that's what we're going to suggest, there are different approaches. Again, Chazal ask, why these 10? And there are all sorts of different approaches. The one that I think rings most true is that these dibrot are chapter headings. Chapter headings. What I mean by that is, in each dibra are a series of mitzvot which emanate from that dibra, or not emanate from it, but can be included in the same section as that dibra. For example, the easiest one, Zochor es Yom HaShabbos L'Kadsho. So you can put in that phrase in Shabbos, you can put Shemitah, you can put Yovel, you can put all the Yontifs and not doing Malacha on Yom Tov. All of these things fall into that category. So rabbis sit down and they spend time on this, and we're not going to do it because it would take much longer than we have time for. But they go through all 10 of these dibrot, and they show how each one can serve as a chapter heading. Now, what I want to suggest to go a step further is this shows us the brilliance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as an educator. Because what is he doing? Before he gets to the details, he's showing you where you want to go. Before he gets to the details, he paints the big picture. Then he says, okay, now that we know what we're trying to accomplish, details. And that's a perfect way to teach, I think, very often. Not always, but very often. Where you come to the class and you say, okay, this is the general thing, this is what we want to accomplish today, and we're going to go into the details now. So Kadosh Baruch Hu, according to that position, that these are chapter headings, that's why they were given this way, and they serve as chapter headings for all 613. Okay, so if they are important in that regard, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted Klal Yisrael to see these 10 declarations in their own place, why did Moshe break the tablets? Why did Moshe break the luchot? And to make matters even more difficult, take a look at the second paragraph and the third paragraph on the page. Vayichar af, I'm looking at the underlined section. Vayichar af Moshe, vayishalech miyado es haluchot, vayishabero tom tachas hahar. All right, that seems to be a conscious act, doesn't it? That he saw this and he threw them from his hand. That's the way the Torah says it. Oh, that's the way the Torah says it. You just said the Ramban. Okay, and he threw them away. Number two, in Devarim, the information is even clearer. When Moshe responds, is saying his farewell addresses to Klal Yisrael, and he's summarizing many of their experiences together, he says, "Vo'et pos b'shrei haluchot," and I took hold of those luchot, va'ashalchem me'al shtei yodai, va'ashabrem le'einehem. I took those two luchot, I smashed them in front of their eyes. So again, it seems to be a conscious act, something that is meant to teach something. Keep going. Now I'm going to go, yes.
As opposed to saying these people don't know the details.
All right, you're raising a good point. All right, I'll repeat it. If any of us were there, would we have broken the luchot? And he's suggesting that no, that a better approach would have been to say these people don't have the details yet, and we can't blame them. All right, and he does break the idol. Right, that's it. That's the question. That's our question. Moshe Rabbeinu breaks the luchot. Maybe you wouldn't, maybe I wouldn't, but he did. And we have to try to understand why. Yes.
Just be because also he wanted it to be so strong and so shocking to everybody that they would get, wow, this is really important.
Okay, we'll get to that. We'll see that there are various different approaches to this question, and they'll range all across the spectrum. Now, but again, now to make matters more difficult, we looked at the actual psukim, which seemed to indicate a conscious act on Moshe's part. If you take a look at the top of page 2, the Talmud, the Gemara quotes a pasuk where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, and Moshe's recalling this for the people, HaKadosh Baruch Hu told me to make another set of luchot, tachat haluchot asher shibarta, right, to take place of the luchot that you broke. Say Chazal, you know what Hashem is saying? Yeyasher kochacha sheshibarta. I agree, and they name this as one of 3 places in the Jewish experience, in Moshe's experience, where Moshe adds something that is later agreed to by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The other 2 are that he adds one extra day, and I'm trying to think of the other one. I knew it, I had it, and what? Kiddush Levana? Kiddush, maybe, I don't know about that. All right. Anyway, I'll try. Maybe I'll remember it by the end of the session. What? When they were receiving the Torah, they were told, wait for 2 days. Moshe added a day. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu agreed to it after the fact. Why he added a day, that's another discussion. But he added a day. All right, now, Rashi, and this I find, when I saw this, I find this mind-boggling. Rashi is commenting on the last pasuk of the Torah. The last pasuk of the Torah says that Moshe was the greatest Navi of all time. No come owed to Moshe. Nobody can reach Moshe's level. And then it lists a series of things attributed to Moshe. Ulakol hayad hachazaka, ulakol hamorah hagadol. That's on the right-hand column of the next to last section of it. Leinei kol Yisrael. So that's what the Torah says. Along come the rabbis and they chop it up. They take it piece by piece. L'chol hayad hachazaka. What does that refer to? What was the particular thing that was a yad hachazaka, a strong hand? Shakibel haTorah beluchos biyado. That he was able, and apparently it must have been heavy, right, to hold the luchot, that he brought the luchot down personally in his hands. That's Yad HaChazaka. Ulamara Hagadol, all of the great wonders that he performed. Nisim Uvuros Shebamidbar Hagadol Vahanora. Again, what it's doing is it is using the phraseology of the text and noting where that appears elsewhere, and therefore Yad HaChazaka, all right, it's Nisim and Gvuros Bamidbar. I'm sorry, is the Kibbutz Torah Biyado. And finally, the last one, Le'enei Kol Yisrael, before the eyes. What was the great thing that he did to the before the eyes of the people? Shenaso libo lishbor haluchot le'enei. Rashi's quoting Chazal here, that his heart was moved to destroy the Luchot. Now, is that the last thing I want to remember about Moshe? The final climactic note concerning his contribution to Jewish thought and life is that he broke the Luchot. It really, we need to understand this. We need to understand this. So we're going to take a look first at the one end of the spectrum. And that end of the spectrum is introduced to us by the Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, who I've told you in the past I feel is my favorite classical commentary because he tries very hard to stick to Pashut Pshat. And he says, Vayashalech miyado kishera'ah ha'egel toshash kocho v'lo yabo koach v'hishlicham re'rakot. When Moshe actually saw the egel, and seeing is believing, right? He was told there was an egel, but he didn't see it yet. As soon as he saw those people dancing before the egel, he became weak. He became weak. He was just couldn't. And what did he do? He dropped it. But what? But okay. Now the Rashbam is going to say, but he dropped it because it was too hard. That's why. But then he says, and hashlichem rachok mimenu ktsat. He threw them away a little bit, shelo yaziku es raglov benoflam, so that they would not injure him when they fell. So in other words, what is before you object? Let's just basically understand what the Rashbam is doing. The Rashbam is saying, I cannot believe that this was a conscious, that Moshe said, okay, what am I going to do now? I'm going to break the Luchos. There will be those that believe that, but I don't. I believe that it's a simple, straightforward, he couldn't hold them anymore. He says in Devarim that I threw them down. He threw them down so they wouldn't fall on his feet. That's the Rashbam. So therefore, according to the Rashbam, this is an involuntary act, aside from that last piece where you're throwing it away. All right?
That would be by Yashlech, but not by Yishaber.
Yeah, understood. If the Rashbam were here, you could challenge him. But what is motivating the Rashbam is that he is unwilling to accept that Moshe, with conscious decision making, would take the Luchot and break them.
And how does he reconcile by Yishaber?
I have to take. I don't think he says anything on Yishaber, but I'll take another look. All right, but again, he would probably answer, I broke them. In other words, I broke them. They were broken because I dropped them, because I couldn't hold them, and I threw them a little bit away. And in essence, I broke them. Right? Just a thought. All right? Defending the Rashbam. Next page. Yes.
He wanted to throw them. He was not strong. Chashash kochon. He couldn't throw them far.
Right.
It doesn't say that he got weak and he dropped.
No, Toshash Kocho means. Right. Toshach. No. No, Toshash Kocho v'lo yaba koach. He couldn't hold them anymore, is what the Rashbam is saying. All right, and then it says, and they couldn't throw them far. No, v'hishlicham rachok mimenu, and he threw them a little bit away. That's with the next.
If they fell, you can't throw them. It's either either one or the other?
No, that's not true. I'm bringing down the luchot from the top of the mountain. I see this. I feel like I'm about to faint, and I throw them away. I just can't hold them anymore. That's what the Rashbam is suggesting. Yes. Go ahead. What? Now there is a medrash that takes this one step further. By the way, the medrash says basically that the letters on the luchot were miraculous. And the reason that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to hold the luchot and carry them was because the letters assisted him in that task. When we came down the mountain, this is again a medrashic, right? Not in the Torah, medrashic. When he came down the mountain, the letters left. Letters went back to heaven. And basically what happened was he had two heavy stones and he dropped it. So that's the medrash. Same idea that Moshe finds himself unable to continue with these luchot. Yes.
It's a side point, but I think it's relevant.
Go ahead.
The process that we put in the on the first page of Shmuel.
Miyadav. That's a Korean seed. What?
One hand or two hands?
Two hands. Well, again, it depends. It depends. When you have a Kriyu Ksiv, it's a machlokes. Yeah. Oh, interesting. And by the way, Rashi and the last pasuk that I quoted says Yad HaChazakah, strong hand. However, there is a debate. Whenever what he's raising is that you saw in parentheses that's Yadav. Basically, there are certain places in the Torah where there's what we call a Kri Uksiv, where the way we read it is different from the way that it's written. And there is, of course, a debate within Chazal as to whether or not the right version that we will follow, if it makes a difference, is the written version, or whether or not the way we read it is the most important. And it goes back and forth. So that, yes.
Is it possibly looking at Moshe as a contradiction within himself? On one hand, he's a human being, and then we already saw that he's up for 40 days, and he's not a human being.
It's very interesting. Maybe very good, very good. Again, for the audience outside, you're suggesting that he was supernaturally, miraculously different on Har Sinai and able to last 40 days without food and water, et cetera, et cetera. And he comes down, he becomes human again. That's an interesting point. And then this becomes too hard. All right, now let's take a look. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Last comment.
So the second one where it says in Devarim, where he's talking and saying what happened,
Mm-hmm.
he's describing it that he had to grab the luchot.
Yes, he is.
And he actually.
The Rashbam will have a problem with that person. Yes, absolutely. Agreed. Okay, and so will the Medrash. In other words, because now it could be, and this is a topic that we really should talk about at greater length. Moshe sometimes changes the emphasis of a particular event in a different way. For example, when he reminds the people now, when he's about to die, about the Chet HaMeraglim, he says the Meraglim came back, they gave a great report, and you rebelled. And he does not in any way talk about the act of the Meraglim in causing that rebellion. He leaves it out entirely. Why? Because he's turning to these people and he's saying, don't think it was someone else, it was your parents, and it could be you. And I'm afraid it will be you. And there, what? Well, but he's speaking Lashon Hara about the other people, right? In other words, he's not. So I don't think that's it. I think it's that. Personally, I think what he's doing is he's saying, he's very afraid. And you see that when Reuven, Gad, and Chatzi, Shevet, Menashe come to him, what does he say? He says, what are you doing? You want to be Be'ever Yarden. You want to be outside the borders of Israel in the Jordan Valley, right? Your predecessors were at this point. and they failed. And if you fail there, then everyone's going to fail. They're all going to hear what you're doing, and they have to come with a conclusion. No, they'll go help the conquest, but you see that Moshe's afraid, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. We're replaying an event that was ended in tragedy. We're coming back to Eretz Israel. We're on the border once again, and could happen. So I think maybe the Rashba might say, and I don't know this for sure, that Moshe is changing things a little bit to teach them a lesson, that the Luchot I broke on purpose, even though he didn't. All right, and again, that may not be a good explanation, and it's certainly an issue with the Rashbam's approach. Yes.
Moshe did not hesitate to shatter the tablets. In other words, he didn't have a conflict there.
No. Which said, where are you looking? Page 3. Well, that's the Ramban's position. We're not there yet. We're not there. All right, but the Ramban is not agreeing with Rashbam. In other words, he's what? So turn to the next page. All right, since we said we were going to do that. All right, come back. Oh no, stay on this page. I'll get to the Ramban. Page 3. A defensive maneuver. All right, so we've dealt with that point of view that suggests, against what would seem to be the testimony of the text, that Moshe Rabbeinu did not consciously throw down the Luchot. Somehow he was able to continue and he dropped them, or he threw them, whatever. Now, the Ramban also does not believe that this is a voluntary act. But the Ramban makes it much more human. What does he say? Right? Ki lo nimna Moshe b'chol ze lishpor osam, ki choro lo bir'oso ha'maseh hara hahu, v'lo yochol lehisapek. He did not hesitate to destroy, and that's the Ramban's words. That's not the words of the Torah. In other words, the Ramban is saying he didn't, even they were so holy and they were so important, and we spoke about that before, nonetheless, he did not hesitate. Why? Because he was angry. And therefore, he could not stop himself. Lo yachol lehisapek. All right, that's very human, right? In other words, he sees this and what's in his hands, he breaks. Okay, that's the Ramban. So those are two approaches which suggest that this was an involuntary act. When Ramban says that he does it because of anger, I'm considering that involuntary. In other words, he becomes so angry, using the Ramban's words, that he can't hold himself back. And that's why he breaks the Luchot. Then there are a number of people, a number of Mefarshim, first in the Medrash and then after that other commentaries, who offer various reasons as to why Moshe might have broken the Luchot. So now we're traveling to a whole other end of the spectrum, right? We're moving from involuntary to voluntary. He did this for a reason. That seems to be what the text is saying, but we want to know what the reason is. So the first, two quotes from the Medrash suggest that he did it as a defensive maneuver. What do I mean? He wanted to defend the people from the calamity that was about to occur. So the first one, which most rabbis says, Omar Moshe, mutav nidonim kishogagin, va'al yu k'mezidin. Better. All right, now let's understand. What are we talking about? When it comes to Jewish law, there's a spectrum of responsibility and culpability. There are 3 stages. At the bottom is onus. Onus is I'm forced to do something, either by someone forcing me or force of circumstance. At the top is mezid. I did it with forethought and planning. This is what I wanted to do. Shogeg, which everybody thinks means by mistake, it doesn't really mean totally by mistake. It means that I did it, but I should have been better. I should have. So shogeg is not totally free from responsibility. It means you forgot at Shabbos. You shouldn't forget at Shabbos. What do you mean you forgot at Shabbos? You forgot, in other words, you turned on the light because you didn't know that you shouldn't turn on the light. You should learn that. So in other words, but you, if we want to move away from the mitzvot for a moment, I would say that if you have a car and you take the car in on Monday to check the brakes, and then on Tuesday they fail and you hit someone, that's onus. You did what you were supposed to do, right? And you didn't check the brakes. You checked the brakes, and therefore you're not responsible at all. At all. But what if I have a car and I haven't checked the brakes for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years? In other words, I will check the brakes. I don't have to check the brakes. And the brakes fail. Mm-hmm. That's not mazid. It's not totally a conscious act. It might be shogeg. It might be considered that middle. It might be shogeg karov lamezid. It gets more complicated, which is a criminal, which is between. It falls in between. It's not yet mazid, but it's not shogeg. So what does the Medrash say? The Medrash says, listen, before I give them these laws, they don't know them. So they're shogegin at best. They're doing what they're doing. They're doing it as by because they don't know better. They're ignorant. They don't know better. What? I'm sorry. They correct. In other words, that's why I think he's not saying they're onus. Onus would be that they were forced to, and we've spoken about that before. Here he's saying they should have known better, but they did it as a shogeg. They didn't say, I want to break the Torah. They said this is part of you can do this within Torah law. They didn't know all the details. Once I give them the law, however, they will become mezidim. Better that they should be shogegim than mezidim. I'm defending them by not giving them the luchot. So he's talking about is the punishment that might ensue. In other words, what the Medrash is saying is, yes, it's b'di'evet, as you say, it happened already. He's not trying to stop it. He knows he's trying to protect them from the ramifications of what they did. They did it as shogegin, therefore they're less responsible for it than mezidim. Okay? So that's one defensive maneuver. Yes?
I learned once that the luchos were kind of ksuba, and as long as they were not really married to Hashem, they were not responsible for their adultery as a married woman.
Interesting. All right. A mitigation of their responsibility. Okay. Just to repeat, I never heard that before, but that the luchot were like a ksuba in marriage, and that until most Bnei Israel are married to a Kodesh Baruch Hu, they have a bris and it's total and it's complete. Bris, not a bris milah, bris, a covenant. Then they're in a situation where they haven't gotten the ksuba, so therefore it mitigates what they did. Okay, same idea. The second medrash quoted here is actually somewhat stranger. Second medrash says, for Arah, I'm looking at the third paragraph, last paragraph on page 3. V'era v'hinei chatasem l'Hashem Elokechem re'ei she'en Yisrael, etc., etc. He says the following: HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Bnei Yisrael have sinned, so I'm going to sin. I'm going to throw down these luchot. I will be culpable for that act, and therefore you're going to have to punish me as well as Bnei Yisrael. No, it isn't. But he thinks it. But at that, again, according to the Medrash, he thinks it's going to be a chait. He thinks that destroying the luchot is not going to be something that Hashem wants. It turns out the Gemara says it is, but this Medrash is taking us into Moshe's mind at that particular moment. And at that particular moment, he's defending the nation by making himself culpable. You're going to have to. Now, this actually, Moshe does this at another point in this whole section of the Torah, where he turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he says, if they sinned, mecheni nami sifracha, right? I want to be erased from your Sefer. And there's a debate. What's that? Is it the Sefer Achayim? Is it the Sefer Torah? He says, if you don't forgive them, then I'm out. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, those who sinned, I will erase. All right. So in other words, he teaches him that you cannot take the fall for them. Doesn't work. Yes. Interesting.
He did it. It's amazing. I never heard this before, but I heard it from his granddaughter.
Right.
His name. That Moshe actually consciously hit the rock, even though Hashem told him to speak to the rock, because otherwise Hashem would have destroyed that generation.
Okay. All right. So that's very interesting. Rav Schwab suggests that I'm telling the audience at home, that hitting the rock, right? That hitting the rock, it was similar to what this Medrash is saying, which is that he knew he was doing the wrong thing, and he was doing it to lessen the culpability of the people. I have a different explanation for that whole event, but that's not what we're not there yet. All right. Now, take a look at the next. The next is condemnation. All right. Basically, he figures as follows. This is Rashi. Ma Pesach shehoya achas min hamitzvot. One Pesach is, the Korban Pesach is one mitzvah out of all the mitzvot. And concerning it, God said, Kol benechar, no apostate can eat from it. Now, they're going to be apostates for the whole Torah. I'm destroying it, not to protect them, because I'm condemning them. They don't deserve it. They don't deserve the Torah, and they have to be taught that they don't deserve the Torah, because one mitzvah, the Pesach, you could be destroyed for. So what about 613? So Moshe is condemning the people for that. The next two. The Hamek Dovar and the Meshech Chochmah are two commentaries that are more, not contemporary, but closer to our time. The Hamek Dovar says the following, that Moshe consciously waited until the nation was before him. He could have broken those luchot on top of the mountain, but he consciously waited because he wanted them to see the breaking and to understand what they did was wrong, and that they didn't deserve, as it were, to get the Torah. So he's taking that concept and making it even more of a conscious act. I'm delaying my breaking of the tablets so that the nation will learn from it. The Meshech Chochmah says something beautiful, and it fits very well in with what's happening with the Egel. The Meshech Chochmah says, Ha'im, I'm looking at the last quote on page number 4. Ha'im tidamu ki ani inyan ve'ezu kedusha bilti mitzvos Hashem. I don't want you to think that there is such a thing as kedusha that is not directly attributed to Hashem. You, by building this Egel, you were trying to what? Replace me. That's what they say. They say, Moshe, and I know Moshe's not there, and let's build this Egel. They were basically, and we've spoken about this before, they were trying to keep a distance, maintain a distance from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This will be the intermediary. This will be our Moshe. Moshe says, you're making a huge mistake. There is no Kedusha that doesn't come from Hashem. And at this point, these Luchot are not Kadosh. Because of your acting, because of your inability to accept them, they are not Kadosh, and that's why he breaks them. To show that the Luchot themselves are not the issue. It's the relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's the issue. Yes.
I think I understand it correctly. I just want to make sure. The first was the Moshe was afraid that the Egel Zahav would be Avodah Zarah. They'd be worshiping, instead of worshiping Egel Zahav, they'd be worshiping
There's a whole debate about the Egel HaZahav. There are those who, yeah,
Avodah Zarah, but they would be worshiping the calf instead of.
right. They were looking. They were looking. This takes the position, right, that what they were trying to do was not bow down to a god. They were trying to replace Moshe as the intermediary between them and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And what Moshe is saying is, you don't place that Kedusha on me. I'm not independently sanctified, and you don't need me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the creator of sanctity, and no sanctity exists in the world unless he is part of it. And now these luchot are therefore not sanctified. Right? I'm breaking something that really doesn't matter, because right, that's what they were doing. That's, if you look at their words when it happens, that seems to be the case. Moshe's not here, and yes.
See it yet. So they had to do it right until the moment when he saw, and then he broke.
Say again. No, in other words, they were sanctified
Right.
until he sees what.
And then he broke.
That's correct. That's correct, because they weren't sanctified anymore in his mind.
But Hashem took that holiness away, and it became heavy for his arm.
No, that you're what you're doing is you are merging a number of different commentaries. It's possible. It's possible. But what he is saying is, no, Moshe consciously breaks it to show the people that this is no longer sanctified. Not that he dropped it because he couldn't hold it. He deliberately, it's educative. I want them to see that there is no Kedusha other than a relationship with Hashem. And they tried to replace me, and that was a mistake. Yeah, yes. All right, now, what?
But the implication is he did it out of anger.
That's why the Ramban says what he says, right? In other words, he got angry. The commentaries that are using these arguments would say he got angry and said, I'm going to do something, and consciously destroyed. The Ramban says he got angry and couldn't help himself. There are two different approaches, right?
Hashem wasn't upset with him that he broke them like he was when he hit the rock?
According to the Gemara, he was not. We found that before. Yasher kochacho sheshibarta. All right, I want to go to one last possibility. It's really not that different from some of the things that we've said so far, but years ago I noticed a very strange anomaly, and that is there's something that appears in Moshe's recollection of the events that does not appear in the original recordation of them. Take a look at Shmos Perek Lamed Daled at the top. Page 5. When the event is recorded initially, the Torah simply says, "Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, psol lecha shlei luchos havanim karishonim, v'chasavti al haluchot asher hayu al haluchot v'rishonim asher shibarto." God told me to carve new luchot. By the way, that makes it different than the first luchot, which were carved and written by God. This one is a partnership. Why that's so, we could talk about, but we're not going to have time now. And that's it. The next pasuk, be ready to go up. Simple. When he reminds the nation of what happened, he says, Hashem Elai, Psol lecha shnei luchos havanim karishonim, va'alei elai hahora, va'asisa lecha aron eitz, and make for yourself a wooden aron, kodesh, to put the luchos in. Once he introduces that, look at all the underlined sections. he says, he repeats it another 3 times within 5 sentences, right? Right? I say, you should put them in the aron. Va'as aron atzei shitim. I made an aron of, he puts it before the carving of the luchos. And then va'asimas aluchos ba'aron asher osisi. And I put them into the, what's going on? This is something that didn't appear in the original narrative, but appears now. So this is before. This is when he's in between the 2 luchot. In other words, good question. I would assume that he carries them down and then puts them in the aron. In other words, that's the point. In other words, all right, now, why would this be so significant? So I'm going to suggest something, and like it or not, you'll hear it. The aron, it transmits a message, and that is that the luchot have to have context. They have to have a home. And the aron is that home physically. And you can't have the luchot without having the home. What does it represent? It represents the home that exists in our hearts and our minds concerning those luchot. What Moshe saw was the luchot did not have context. Bnei Yisrael were not ready to see. It's just a little bit of an additional concept. Basically, what he's saying is these luchot independently, even if they're sanctified, are not what they should be. They only achieve their full force when they are surrounded by something. In this case, the aron eitz. And that's why he repeats it over and over again, because that's the lesson they have to learn. The lesson they have to learn is you have to be the context in which the luchos are. And if the luchot don't have that context, then they might as well be broken. That's correct.
The idea, what's behind it, is coming from Hashem, not from Moshe.
No. I'm suggesting that, again, I don't know Hashem's reasons, but we always struggle to try to understand, right? What I see from this text is, yes, Hashem commanded, but it became so important for Moshe that he kept repeating it. So what I'm suggesting is that the aron represented something that was significant to Moshe. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said, I died, da. And therefore, maybe Hashem, was transmitting the message that luchos have to have context. Yes. She thinks that's beautiful. I'm telling her, yeah. Oh, the building of the Mishkan. It's interesting, correct. The tale of the breaking of the Luchot and the Egel Hazav appears in the Torah between two parshiot there and 2 parshiot there, all of which speak about the building of the Mishkan, which again, some say the Mishkan was a home, right? But also that the Mishkan was a replace. There are those who say, right? There are those who say that the Mishkan was a response to the Egel, right? And that those are different positions. All right, I'm going to end with I'm sorry.
It seems that the Egel represents what Rambam brings down is how Avodah Zarah came into the world. As the Egel is not that, you can't believe that they forgot who God was
Right.
so fast. The Egel is simply a siman that I'm afraid the Egel to reach God.
Well, that's correct. That according again, there's a lot of ink spilled on the question: what was the Egel? Was it actually avodah zarah? Was it actually idolatry? Or was it a replacement for Moshe? They believed they needed something between themselves and God, and they made the
same avodah zarah that began after creation.
Right.
According to the Rambam.
Uh,
See,
Correct. All right, very good. Right. The Rambam says that Avodah Zarah originally began as something to reach God.
But
All
it
right.
doesn't seem to be the point. They had no proof that Moshe had died.
That's correct. I'm not. That's not the point, though. That in other, no. In other words, the fact is that they became frightened and they built that ego. It was the wrong thing to do, and we're looking at various different options as to what Moshe's trying to teach them by breaking the Luchot. All right. The last thing I would like to suggest is there someone else in the story who I wouldn't expect to break the Luchos? Who's that? Aharon. Aharon. These are two very, very different men, according to Chazal. Aaron is the Rodev Shalom. This is one that's famous. Rodev Shalom. Oev Brios, right? Makarvan Torah. He pursues peace. He tries to make sure that nobody's angry. He does something that if you and I tried it, we might get our head handed to us. Some people are arguing. He says to one person, he really wants to make up with you. And then he goes to the other person and says, he really, and somehow he manages to make them believe that and not call him a lawyer and basically become, so that's Aaron. And we see Aaron's actions at the Yegel are really his personality. He's trying to put it off. According to Chazal, he's trying to delay. But it's hard to understand why, in all of the punishment immediately for the Egel, Aaron is not punished. It's hard to understand based upon, and that's why there are those who suggest that hitting the rock was not really the sin that caused their Moshe and Aaron's not entry into the land. That sins previously were, but Hashem didn't want to pin those sins on Moshe and Aaron, so he basically kept the punishment for later. So that's why the people are wrestling. Chazal are wrestling. Chazal are wrestling with what happened and trying to say, well, what makes sense here? What happened? Now, the idea that Moshe and Aaron we said that Aaron is Oed Shalom, Rodev Shalom, right? He pursues peace, etc. What's the pasuk for Moshe? Very, very few people know it. Hadin Yikov es Hahar. Let justice break the mountains. Let's justice. If I see something, and some will say, by the way, that's what Yikov. No, it's to break, right? Rend mountains asunder, and basically, actually, Yikov. All right, there is a similar word, I think, or similar usage, but in this case, it means break them apart. Yikov. And what is Moshe saying? I'm not diplomatic, right? There are those who suggest that that's what he's saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when he says, I'm hard of speech. One explanation is, you're picking the wrong guy. You're going to put me in front of Paro. I'm going to tell him like it is. And that's Moshe. Moshe doesn't know from Kunsin, right? He doesn't know, no excuses. You are who you are. You do what you do. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does something magnificent. He takes these two brothers who are so totally different, and he makes them together partners in the leadership of Bnei Israel. And what he's saying, I believe, is that each one of these is important in leadership. And I'm giving you two people who represent that combination. You have to find someone who will bring that combination together. And what's interesting, by the way, and with this I'll end, is that the person who takes over for Moshe is not like Moshe. Yehoshua needs a lot of reinforcement. Kadosh Baruch Hu has to prod him. The person who takes over for Aaron eventually is Pinchas, right? Right? As soon as something happened, he went. So you see that Hashem is sort of saying, I believe, neither of these are exclusive to one particular role, right? In other words, this combination of leadership is what we're looking for. And both of them are important. And the leader has to know when to rend mountains asunder and when to pursue peace. And that's the challenge that has remained across time to our day.